Well, it was recently that I noticed an interesting discussion online, and leave it to modern times for social media to prompt a discussion about social media, right? But it was a story about how one political campaign has leveraged social media, and that got me thinking, what are some of the other ways, modern ways, mind you, that election campaigns have been trying to get your vote? And so Peter Wielhouwer is back with us from the Poli-Sci Department at Western Michigan University to talk about that. You looked into this a little bit, didn't you, Peter?
I did, and it's kind of an interesting story. You know, this is about actually the Clinton campaign, and the basic premise is that for a long time, for several months now, that the Clinton campaign has been paying trolls to go on social media and to flood Clinton critics, even just kind of regular people, not candidates and not public officials, but just regular people posting anti-Clinton things, flooding their online profiles and so forth with what appears to be massive support. And as it turns out, this is reported now both by Daily Kos, which is a liberal outlet, and the Los Angeles Times, that you have individuals on staff who are creating multiple anonymous identities and then posting multiple times on people's Facebook pages and their comment sections of blogs and things like that, as a way of basically shutting down Clinton critics.
Wow. So when we say anonymous identities, we really aren't talking about a nameless profile, like on Facebook, for example. There must be a name there, right?
Right. So there are names, and there are a large number of names, but it's not like Richard Piet using his Facebook page to then go find people and saying, "Hi, I'm Richard Piet. By the way, this and that and this and that." Right.
Yeah, right.
It's about somebody going on, creating an online profile for an anonymous 451 or Hillary's Great 721 or something like that, and posting in those kinds of ways.
I see.
Now, what's interesting about this is that the reports actually began during the Democratic nomination process. So that this was a strategy, a tactic, actually, that was being used against Bernie Sanders. And then after Mrs. Clinton had secured the nomination, was being turned against Trump.
Right. This is a modern tactic, then, that I presume others would take notice of, right?
Well, the problem of trolling generally is not a new thing. This happens in all kinds of ways, on all kinds of issues, and it's the modern version of kind of old school political dirty tricks and tactics. Mm-hmm. And these kinds of things are certainly not is not alone. The Clinton campaign is not alone in engaging in these kinds of things. And let's be clear, this is not illegal, even though it may be distasteful. But it's a way of artificially inflating perceptions of candidate support. All campaigns try to do that, but this was a particularly unique way of leveraging social media in that, and in the fact that it was reported as being against kind of private individuals expressing their own support or concerns about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, very interesting. We're talking with Peter Wielhouwer from the WMU Poli-Sci Department about the modern tactics of a campaign, and we'll continue in just a moment on WBCK. WBCK, we're here with Professor Peter Wielhouwer from the WMU Poli-Sci Department. We've been talking about the modern tactics in the presidential campaign. So Hillary's got an army of folks barraging on Facebook. Is Trump doing anything similar?
Well, I really looked into this, trying to find what kinds of things the Trump campaign was engaged in or being accused of engaged in. And while I didn't find anything specifically about those similar kind of tactics, I mean, I think certainly there are a couple of areas of grave concern with regard to the way the Trump campaign is running things. One of these is his fundamental approach to his campaign rhetoric. From the early days of his campaign, the way he talks about candidates and about groups in the electorate has been more personal and more visceral, and I think more overtly divisive than we've usually seen. Now, we all know that campaigns, especially even presidential campaigns, they do get personal. What's interesting is that historically they get personal kind of at the end when everybody's exhausted and desperate. Right. Donald Trump kind of started out there. And that really is one of the uglier sides of the way the campaign trajectory has worked this year. And then the other side of this is that we do have a very broad set of concerns being raised by Democrats and the left in general against kind of Republican attempts at voter monitoring, voter suppression, and so forth. And the Trump campaign, to some extent, is involved in this. There was reporting yesterday by news sources about ballot security methods and voter monitoring and so forth. And Mike Pence was accused of prompting the Indiana State Police to raid minority voter registration programs, and so there are these kinds of processes that are that are going against the Republicans as well. So
yeah.
I certainly want to. This is an equal opportunity kind of process, but it is one of the dark sides of working in an open democracy.
So are those substantiated, those accusations?
So, Donald Trump himself, in terms of, trying to get people to be more vigorous about their voter monitoring and about ballot security, he explicitly has stated that that's what they ought to be doing and has said that that's what they're going to be doing in different places.
Yeah.
The Mike Pence tie is a little bit more cloudy because there was a fact that the Indiana State Police did, in fact, raid minority voter registration program offices. They said that they did find evidence of fraudulent registration going on in that process. The unclear thing is the hand that Mike Pence might have played in that, because he's still the sitting governor of the state.
Right.
To what extent did he direct them to target this group? That's still unclear at this point.
So, yeah, the example of the Hillary campaign rallying fake profiles to spread the message on social media sounds a little bit more high-tech than this other, than the Trump thing. The Trump thing being more visceral and the rhetoric talk that he's chosen, that seems a little bit more traditional, doesn't it?
Well, it is traditional, but, if somebody said, hey, Donald, here's an idea, do you want to go pay some trolls on social media? I'm sure he said, let's see if we can find somebody to do that for free. Yeah. I'm not sure that he would have shelled out the money for it. And I want to make clear that I'm not saying that it's not happening on the other side as well. That kind of thing isn't happening. One of the aspects of this campaign that enables us to see more of this from the Democratic side is this whole barrage of WikiLeaks emails that are released, in which we're seeing kind of the soft, dark underbelly of kind of inside campaign tactics and discussions, where you've got the discussions between Jennifer Palmieri on the Clinton side and John Podesta, talking about these constituency groups, talking about their opponents, talking about their own candidate, and kind of the brutal honesty that you see in there. Again, most of that stuff is not in any way illegal, but we see more of it on the Democrats because we've got this barrage of inside information that we don't have on the Trump side.
When I first discovered these stories, I said to Peter, it's like an episode of Scandal. And to his credit, Peter said he didn't watch Scandal. That's good, Peter.
And let's be clear, I did watch the first episode.
Oh, okay.
And then I'm sorry, I just could not take it anymore. And so.
Well, I watched it and I thought, does this stuff really go on? Nah. I hope not.
What I found really helpful is trying to go back and revisit The West Wing. And looking at The West Wing episodes, I think we see a little bit more kind of like the inside baseball side, at least on the Democratic side, of kind of how the thinking works on campaigns. Professor
Peter Wielhouwer is with us. We're talking about the modern tactics in a campaign, and we'll continue in just a moment. Professor Peter Wielhouwer, a few more minutes with him right now on WBCK. So I guess I'm not surprised. I mean, social media, for example, has this vast propensity to reach a lot of people, and, political campaigns do their spin on things. I guess the two working together is not so surprising, is it?
No, of course not. It's the way that a lot of information gets distributed in the public these days, and so it's the reality of where we are.
Mm-hmm.
I think what it does allow, though, is for conspiracy theories also to grow faster and have more impact and more publicity than they historically have, because there are just more people that are more extensively networked with on both the left and the right with people who foster conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm. All right. So before you go, I want to talk about this quickly. The assertion that Donald Trump has made that the election process is rigged. I imagine you've had this conversation with your students. What are your thoughts on this?
We've actually had this quite a bit, and especially since it came up in one of the presidential debates. What's interesting is that normally the accusation of election results being rigged is a Democratic complaint, and it usually happens after an election.
Yeah.
And this has certainly been the case over the last 20 years. Even though the reaction to Trump's accusations has been largely negative in the public, I think actually he's done us a favor by raising the issue about the ways in which our system actually is vulnerable and aging, such as in the way we do voter registration and the movement toward paperless balloting in a lot of states. Look, the best objective research shows virtually no evidence of widespread voter fraud or election manipulation. What we do here is anecdotal evidence on a local level of small-scale voting irregularities. Those things do happen, so there's no question about that. One important part of this is that on the conservative side, there is a rumor going around that George Soros, the billionaire liberal philanthropist, owns a voting machine company that gets used all over the place in the country. But that actually is not true. There's been some good reporting on that over the last couple of days. I do want to finish up on a kind of a positive note, if I can.
Yeah. You know what? Before you do that, let me ask one more thing.
Sure.
So if we just zoom out and look at the system, do you see it as being vulnerable to any sort of large-scale voting irregularities that would seemingly be what Trump is referring to?
My assessment, based upon talking to experts in the field, so I have some friends who research this, looking at the experts who do the research, is that widespread vote manipulation and election manipulation itself is not occurring. Doesn't occur. It's very, very difficult to make happen.
Mm-hmm.
That said, because our system has control of this spread all over the place at local levels, there are going to be places where you do have problems that emerge. Dead people staying on election rolls, sometimes dead people turning out to vote. And this has always been a long-time joke in places like Chicago and Louisiana. But, this kind of thing happens all over the place. But it's on a very small scale, and it's hard to keep secret. And so trying to make it happen with a lot of people in a big conspiracy is virtually impossible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, and the dead people voting thing, that's something that even Ruth Johnson, our Secretary of State, has said on this very show was something that she was working to clean up. And that was several years ago now. But at any rate, there's that. All right, so the positive note, Peter, please.
Positive note. Look, in the face of all of these accusations, my sense is that the very best counterbalance to the possibility of voter fraud is high voter turnout. The higher voter turnout is, the less likely it is that either side's going to gain a significant advantage due to using these questionable tactics. Now, we have to be, if you hear things in the public, do your own fact-checking. Look for fact-checkers that are reputable. If your information sources if you only get your information sources from a liberal side or from a conservative side, look at the other side so that you can get information from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Voters need to know what their rights are under the law. I encourage you, go to the Secretary of State's office, make sure you know for sure if you're registered to vote and where you're supposed to vote. If you have a photo ID, bring it. I vote down in Texas Township. Every single time I voted down there, they are asking me for my driver's license, even though it's not a state requirement.
Yeah.
So I encourage you, bring that just to get it over with. Sitting at the polling booth arguing about whether you ought to have that is not the place to have that fight. So if you have those, bring it with you. If you're a polling station monitor for either party, just be really judicious and careful before you accuse people of committing voter fraud or of some kind of voting irregularity. Give the benefit of the doubt to your fellow citizens. If you see a problem, okay, report it or deal with it. But be really careful about doing that.
All right. Well, we always appreciate the time, Peter, and we'll chat with Peter the day after the election. So talk to you on November 9th.
Thanks very much, Richard.
All right. Thank you. Peter Wielhouwer, Professor, Western Michigan University, Political Science Department.